Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Yes, first of all, this is a Squid Game sweatshirt. Got it for Christmas from somebody who thought I resembled the old man. Great Christmas gift, huh? Actually, the show, I don't know about you guys, but the last 3 episodes for me just didn't do it for me. Kind of like the last season of Game of Thrones. Everything was good and then psst. But I'll steer clear of that controversial take for this video and pivot to another controversial topic in the audiophile realm. Blind testing is the subject of the video today. And actually, I'm going to take some blind tests. But first of all, I usually avoid these controversial topics on my channel, the public section at least for subscribers, because I have a private section, the membership section, for where I'll go into things like cables and what reviewers you can trust, some of the more controversial topics. I don't like to call out people publicly on the main channel, so that's why I put it in that section. And if you're paying, obviously you deserve to get my unadulterated opinions and experiences, and also some of the more fun stuff we do that's not audiophile related. I share that in that area. But I thought today I'd throw a controversial topic in the public section because, quite frankly, I don't think blind testing should be that controversial. I know it's got the 100% subjectivist and the 100% objectivist always fighting online and hyperbole on both sides. But I thought what I would do is break down today the arguments that are good on both sides that I've found, and then what's some value, pluses and minuses with blind testing. And like I said, take some myself and show you what I find valuable. So let's break it down first on a macro level. And in defense of blind testing, you could make a very valid argument that you don't need your eyesight to listen to music. And that's 100% true. You don't need to see what changed ahead of time to hear the difference if the difference is real. And you don't need to see what gear you're listening to be able to tell the difference between the two. So on a macro level, you don't need your eyesight. In fact, you could argue that blind people have better ear listening acuity than sighted people. And even if you put a blindfold over your eyes right now, your hearing will probably be enhanced and your acumen better at picking things out because you're not overloading your brain with synapses from your eyes and processing that too. So, certainly on a macro level, blind testing is totally fine. Now, where do blind testing opponents have some valid arguments that I would agree with? Well, number one, when you start talking about a true double-blind test with ABX testing and getting certain levels of confidence and what you have to do, and sometimes you have to only do short increments in order to, all this stuff that you have to go through is very draconian and not practical for a regular user, consumer to do. And so I totally understand that. And then, quite frankly, another argument I'll put in the subjectivist camp, but they don't usually make this argument, but I'll put it in their camp. You don't have to take a blind test to buy gear. Okay, number one, audio performance and audibility is only one aspect of why people buy stuff. Sometimes it's because of price. Sometimes it's because of looks. Sometimes they just want to support USA manufacturers, or sometimes they just want to try something new. You don't need to always have a blind test to support your purchases. And then, quite frankly, also in defense of subjectivists, again, but they don't make this argument, but even if you're deluded by the difference in its expectation bias or placebo effect, that's fine. Your reality can be perception is reality in most people's world anyway. It's your money. You enjoy it. Even if it's just all in your head that you're hearing the difference, that's fine. Now, should somebody that hasn't totally objectively confirm that they can hear it with a blind test start going on the forums and say, hey, my quantum tunneled outlet, made a night and day difference. My wife in the other room heard the difference. If you really haven't tested it, then I agree that the critics, should just dismiss that. And I do roll my eyes a lot of times when these subjectivists make these claims when I know they probably can't pass a blind test with some of the outlandish claims they make. But on the flip side, like I said, blind testing to do it totally right is impractical. So do you just say these people are right, or do you go through all that rigmarole? Well, as usual, the truth is usually in between. For a manufacturer, quite frankly, I think they should go through these very draconian measures to prove if you're making a claim that is so far beyond engineering, physics, you know, like quantum tunneled outlets. I think I've seen that before. That's something that would win you a Nobel Prize if you could prove some of these things that these manufacturers make. So I think they should go through as much draconian procedures as possible to prove those claims, because even if they don't, you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't they? That would be the best proof and marketing material imaginable. Plus, a Nobel Prize would be probably headed their way. So yes, I do roll my eyes at manufacturers that won't go through this when they're making some outrageous claims that defy all previously known engineering, physics, and science. But the reality is, what the arguments really come down to is for consumers. So just because double-blind testing on a scientific method is too hard, do you not do it ever and just dismiss it and say, hey, whatever I hear cited is fine? No, I mean, you should still do other things to, you don't have to take a formal blind test, but there's a lot of things you can do, and there's a lot of websites, and I'm going to show you again one today where I take some blind tests to determine what audibility thresholds apply to you. And what you'll find is that when you take blind tests, you can start dismissing certain measurements because they're not audible to you. And then you could start dismissing some of these outrageous claims that when you push comes to shove and you have to blind test yourself, you could save yourself a ton of money not falling for the hype. And so that's what I wanted to do today, is show you a site where you can go on and hear certain things. And we'll test and even some things that you can train yourself using blind testing to be a better listener. So one of the things I wanted to show you today, and I'll do it at my listening chair, is how to hear different frequencies and blind test yourself. And that's something you can actually train yourself in theory to do and become better at it. And that's a good skill to have for doing EQ and other things. And then we'll test things like, okay, you see a frequency response curve, plus or minus 3 dB on a speaker. Can you hear 3 dB up and down differences? Well, I'm going to show you how you can test yourself today. I'm going to do it myself, see how well I do. What about 1 dB? What about a half dB? I'll try a half dB today. I'm a little nervous about that. But you'll be able to see which thresholds actually apply to you. So then when you see measurements, you know whether to dismiss them or not as applicable to you. Because I talked about with Vandersteen, for me, timing is not a huge deal. So do you know what your threshold of hearing is for timing delays? Is it 1 millisecond, 3 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds? I bet you don't know, but I'm going to show you today how you can test it, in at least in a small excerpt, to get a general range of what you can hear. It doesn't mean it's always going to be that exact amount, but I mean, this is going to give you a good ballpark of what you can hear and what you can prove. And then if you see a graph or some kind of measurement of one metric or another, you know whether to put stock into it or not. And then another thing you can do is, let's see, we talked about frequency response, timing. What about dynamic range? You see, a lot of the objectivists will always rank gear based on signal to noise ratio. And so let's say you'll see these manufacturers, 130 dB signal to noise ratio DAC versus 120. Both of them are going to be totally inaudible. That difference is inaudible to you, all the other things being equal. So when this manufacturer comes out and says, I got 135 dB negative 130 signal to noise ratio DAC, first time somebody's ever reached that threshold, well, that's great. And if you want to reward them and pay them $20,000 for that DAC, that's great. But just know, audibility, you won't be able to tell from that 135 and 120. Number one, your system is only going to have the signal to noise ratio of the worst component in the chain. And then number two, 120 versus 135, those are still so far above what your hearing acumen can hear that why would you pay for it if you can't audibly prove to hear that difference and improvement? And so blind tests actually end up kind of sabotaging the subjectivists that, you know, make up things and have expectation bias and placebo effect, and manufacturers that do snake oil. And that's good for blind testing, but it also exposes some measurements that are just not even applicable to what you can hear. And so it doesn't make the measurement wrong. That's what the mic is capturing, and that's great for engineering, but it doesn't prove anything from the standpoint of maybe what you should buy if you're buying for an audibility. If you're just wanting to buy because of great engineering, that's a different story. So, and then there's even other things that you can test, like MQA. I'll do it in a separate video. I want to just focus today. Can't make this a 3-hour video, but we can test MQA in a blind test. There's a lot of dogmas on both sides. I'll show you how to do that in another video. But let me jump to my seat and show you a website and screen record everything, and we'll see how I do. Okay guys, I'm using a screen recorder and my Yeti USB mic set on omnidirectional, so you can hear me talk as well as you should hear what comes out of the speakers as I do a few tests. Hopefully you can pick up a lot of this stuff, but again, when we start talking about minute detail differences, it might not be as easy for you to hear on the mic, so it's important, and that's why I did a screen recorder. You can read this a lot better than me just holding up my phone. And you're also going to want to be able to see if you can read this a little better. Audiocheck.net is the site that I'm featuring today that has a lot of good blind tests and just testing in general and things you can train yourself on. There's things like, as you go down here, audio tests such as frequency response, stereo imaging, dynamic range, distortion test, all kinds of cool things. Test tones, tone generators, and then the blind test that we're going to be doing. I'm going to feature a few of those today. Again, I can't go through everything on this site. It's super comprehensive. I can't do every single blind test, but I wanted to feature a few things today, and then we can always come back to it in the future. And one of the first things I thought to show you was, again, this isn't about flexing so much as what I can hear and, you know, bragging about that kind of stuff, because as you see here, it's all about training yourself. Anything that I'm doing here, at least in this particular test, more than likely you're going to be able to do as well if you train yourself to be able to identify different frequencies as they're played. And this, I'm going to show this one because I think this is a particularly valuable skill to train yourself on doing, because if you're doing EQ, it's a lot more efficient and powerful and then room treatments, if you kind of know what frequencies are causing a problem in your room and your song and you want to address it. This is step one, and this is a very basic test. There's only 10 different partitions of sounds that, again, when you hear these, you'll say, oh, or look at these, you may say, oh, this is super easy, I can do this no problem. Well, okay, great, go ahead and prove it though. Do this test. You can there's no way to cheat this test. I guess if you get the first one wrong, you can always restart. But in order to get 10 tests completed, it doesn't allow you to go back from 6 to 5, 4, 3, 2. You got to go all the way through. So there's no way for me to do 10 in a row and cheat the system. So basically what I'm going to do is just show you, what I've trained myself to do and what you may want to do as well over time, so that you can pick out, at least in these broad buckets of 10 different frequencies, how well when you hear it. And this test will just randomly pick one of them. It may do one of these 4 or 5 in a row. It's all random, so you can't even memorize what the test is, because every single time it will be different. So without further ado, let's do this one, and then I'll show you some of these other tests. Hopefully I don't embarrass myself here. Okay, so again, this isn't a super difficult test. This time I got 10 out of 10. And some of these weren't even tested. But do this multiple times. If you can consistently get 10 out of 10, then you've got a good handle, at least on these broad frequency ranges. You'll even want to get yourself to this level of 10 out of 10, because in actuality, you're going to want to be able to get even more partitions, be able to identify between these different frequencies. But this is a good way to see where you stand now, and then train yourself. Again, it's about training to get yourself better at that skill set, and I think it'll pay off for you in the long run to do that. But let's do some things that test your innate ability to hear, you know, where you stand. There's some that'll test what upper level of hearing, how high a frequency range you can hear. So they'll play a full range tone. And then everything except everything below 17,000 hertz, and then a full range up to 22,000 hertz. Can you hear the difference there or not? You know, 16,000 hertz is where I'm usually at. You know, so you could test, you know, what you can hear. Maybe you can hear up to 18 or 20K, but if you can't hear up to 20K, then, you know, errors in your speakers or things that are on measurements, graphs and stuff like that, you can pretty much dismiss. Or maybe you don't even need a super tweeter, you know, like people sell you all kinds of things that you don't need, or measurements that don't make sense if you can't hear anything above that range. Another one that's really good to test is what level of difference you can hear. So when you see a frequency response on a speaker of plus or minus 3 dB, well, here's a good way to test whether you can hear it or not. So here's 3 dB one way. You hear that little increase in the second half of the tone? And that's a decrease. And then here is 3 dB, here is the 440 hertz sine tone, just flat. So this is testing whether or not you can hear 3 dB difference in that tone of 440 hertz. So let's just see how well I do with this. Okay, again, 3 dB is pretty noticeable, and so when speakers say, you know, we're plus or minus 3 dB, how much is that really great? You know, I just was able to easily tell 3 dB difference, you know, pretty significantly. It's pretty easy. You probably even could pick it up on the mic if your hearing's pretty good. But on the flip side, let's go down to maybe 1 dB, and let's see how big a difference that makes. Let's play the defaults first. Okay, so let me see if I can do this at 1 dB. A little bit tougher there. Yep, got it. Okay, so 1 dB was not all that difficult. So you can tell through this test where your ears are right now, and maybe you could practice, but then you know on a measurement scale, plus or minus 3 dB is not that great. You can even hear 1 dB difference. But let's see 0.5 dB. This is a little bit harder. I think I'd probably miss on some of these, but let's just listen. These are very tough. Still, I can tell. All right, let's just see. I haven't done this one in a long time. I think this is the threshold I can get to. 0.5 is the best I can do. Okay, oh, I got one more to go. All right, so I got 9 out of 10 at 0.5 dB. I think that's where I pretty much, last time I checked, once you start getting down to 0.2 dB, that's where I don't think I could get 10 out of 10. Yeah, for me right now, I don't even need to take this. I would be guessing on some of those. So again, here's where you can tell whether measurements that are at 0.5 dB, if that's what your hearing acumen is at right now, or maybe you can pass even this 0.2 dB, then you're going to want to look for accuracy in that area, and then measurements will apply to you and your hearing more accurately when you know where you stand. There's also one that does pitch, but I'll skip that one. Here's another one that's really valuable, because I talked about it with Vandersteen speakers, the timing and phase coherency and whatnot. Well, here's a way that you can test where your hearing stands on hearing timing delays and differences. And then you can determine whether it's a big deal or not, depending on the increments that you may see in a measurement. So here is a pretty big range of 50 milliseconds. So let's play, and it's basically a bass drum and then a hi-hat sound. So one of them is going to be synced, so listen here. And then this is delayed by 50 milliseconds. Okay, you could pretty much hear that difference. Okay. That one would be pretty easy at 50 milliseconds. If I took the blind test, that would be pretty easy. But when I've done it in the past, let's show you what 10 milliseconds sounds like. Still somewhat noticeable. If you really strain, you can hear a little bit, but I don't even know that that would be, you know, some of those I'd probably have to guess on. Definitely at 5 milliseconds, we're starting to get to yeah, I wouldn't be able to pass this. I don't think I've ever gotten 10 out of 10 on 5 millisecond timing difference. So again, and then you could even go, maybe your hearing's even better. Maybe you can even go to 1 millisecond, you know, but this will tell you where you stand in terms of timing and what your ears are sensitive to, such that you can determine whether measurements will apply to you or not. Another really good test you can take here to see where your hearing stands is an dynamic range, because you'll see signal to noise, this is somewhat related to signal to noise ratio you see on DACs and different equipment. And again, all these DACs that have 130 signal to noise ratio, that's great. But number one, your signal to noise ratio is only as good as your entire system combined. So the DAC is nothing if the signal to noise ratio of everything it goes into after it is higher. But here's a case where you can determine really whether or not what noise floor is really noticeable to you. And especially you could, if you do it in your room, you can test for your room noise floor. So like if you have air conditioning working at the time, or I have a projector over my head that has a little bit of noise, so I can kind of tell what levels of signal to noise and dynamic range is noticeable. And what this test, let me do 24, something really easy to tell first. Only 24 dB of dynamic range. Let me show you what that sounds like. So that's a signal at full scale, and then the second half of that you heard, you should have heard that noise was only attenuated by 24 dB. And the other option is mute, so full scale and then mute. So you should be able to hear that noise. You probably can even pick that up on the mic. So that would be an easy 10 out of 10. Most people can pass that for 24 dB of dynamic range, being able to hear that. But then when you start getting a little bit loud, a little bit higher in dynamic range, let's go to double that. Let me show you what that sounds like. Still very noticeable. I don't know what the mic is picking up for you guys. I've got this playing pretty loud, but that I could easily do that 10 out of 10. But then when you start getting up, let's see, 78 dB. Okay, that's much more difficult. I could tell you right now that probably 10 out of 10 of this would be hard to do for most people, especially if you have anything going. I probably would have to turn off my projector, and do this, and I probably could get this one right, maybe 10 out of 10 if I turn off my projector. But this will tell you whether some of these stats with signal to noise ratio even is applicable to you. Some of these noise and problems that they find are so far, or just things that the mic can pick up that your ears can't pick up. So then you can dismiss some of those measurements or quote faults in the gear. So again, can't spend an hour doing every single test, every single one, but just wanted to show you and give you some feedback of the different things that you can learn and how you can benchmark yourself such that you can see where your ears stand in terms of measurements. And then in some cases, like the frequency test that I did, you can test yourself and train yourself to get better at it. And like I said, there's a bunch of other tests you can do online. I'll circle back to this in the future, but this is a good starting point to give you guys some help and a way to do some blind testing and benchmark yourself. And then we'll come back to this in the future. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, sign up and subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.